and welcome back. It's been a few weeks. I've been ill. Before I start, I just want to ask everyone who's watching to subscribe to this channel and go down to the notifications and select all. That way, it helps my channel out and supports the channel and helps me in the long term. Now, there's a couple of things that it's really important that I want to discuss today. The first one is recently on 60 Minutes, there was an episode where a young woman living in a supported independent living house, um, she was assaulted by some support workers. One person stuck a tube down her throat to test for a gag reflex, and the person then spat in the tube. This is nothing more but an assault and criminal abuse. These people should be criminally charged and get a jail sentence. What they'd done was absolutely disgusting and vile to that young woman and her family. Um, it's ruined this young girl's life, young woman's life, and that's just not fair. And the reason I raised this is because there's been a campaign against having a national register of support workers, independent support workers, mainly. When those support workers who work for a service organisation have ongoing training, unlike independent support worker where there's no regulation or supervision at all. There's one person who's very vocal against having a national register of support workers, especially independent support workers, and he's a member of the IAC to the NDIS, Independent Advisory Council, which is appointed by, all those members are appointed by Bill Shorten. Now, the person I'm specifically mentioning today is Dr. George Telopoulos. I've been reading his comments and views and opinions on LinkedIn and other social platforms for quite a few months. His comments and actions, in my opinion, do nothing but to frighten and scare people unnecessarily. It's got to stop. He's entitled to his own views and opinions through his own life experiences. I support that. But when you're a member of the IAC and you're the independent chairperson of the Every Australian Counts organisation, a member of the Access Committee for the Victorian Government, a director of InLife, member of the Summer Foundation, then your views and opinions then come across a whole spectrum of people with and without disabilities and support workers. Scaring people into siding with your own personal views and opinions is an abhorrent task, abhorrent issue, an abhorrent way of gaining support for your opinion. And I was recently made aware that this Dr. George Telopoulos put up a cartoon a few months ago where this person with a disability sitting on a toilet. To one side, there was a support worker with toilet paper in hand, ready to wipe the person's bum. And then on the other side of the person with a disability in the cartoon was a stern-looking woman with a clipboard with auditor written on it. Now, this not only demeans people with disabilities, but it does the exact same thing for support workers. Most of the support workers I've accessed over the last few years have been absolutely fantastic. They've done their job expertly. They've had a lot of ongoing training because they work through a service organisation. And to belittle that type of work for your own selfish needs, in my opinion, is despicable. I was so offended by Dr. George Teleporos's posts on LinkedIn over the last few months. I've actually written to Bill Shorten and asked him to immediately and permanently dismiss Dr. George Teleporos from the IAC. He's not an independent advisor. He's only there for himself, in my opinion. All he ever talks is about my needs, my rights, my needs, my rights. Well, George, you're a representative. You're supposed to be a representative to people with disabilities. And you don't do that when you only talk about yourself. And I've had a gut full of it. You're a selfish man. You're a narcissist. And every time you put up a post, it's Dr. George Teleporos, AIC, GAICD, PhD. The GAICD means he's a graduate of the Australian Institute of Corporate Directors. So what's he done as a graduate? Well, he's done a course through that organisation, which has no affiliation with any university, TAFE courses or anything. They've just written their own course and at a cost of $10,000 to $15,000, and he's passed it. And he's a PhD in psychology. Well, you'd think someone who was a psychologist would be prepared to show empathy and understanding towards other people who have issues, especially those with disabilities. But he has none. Not my opinion. It's all about him, his needs, his wants, his rights. He represents himself, and that's it. Now, I've tried to have a good hard look into his past. There's so many crossovers with his parts in being a director of InLife, part of the Summer Foundation, and he's a founder of the Self Managers Hub, where they help people who self-manage be creative and innovative in the way they apply for funding. Now, that's not a free organisation. You have to pay to belong to it. So what are you doing, George? Are you making money from the NDIS while being a participant of the NDIS? I had a look at the Summer Foundation's financial records, and there's some issues there as well. He only talks about himself, and when he's not talking about himself, he's talking to Bill Shorten or other high members of the NDIA management, and he never asks questions, delves deep into changes that could affect other people. And I'm not surprised hasn't got calluses on his lips or he's kissing butt that much. But I've had a gut full of this George Teleporos. He even gave a woman on LinkedIn a heads up information on a job that hadn't been advertised yet. As far as I know, you can't do that. So what do we do? Do we sit back and let this person represent himself instead of representing people with disabilities? He says he does, but I can't see any evidence because all he ever talks about is himself. I really wish the IAC members would be stood down and those positions be elected by people participants of the NDIS. So we get people who represent us, not to represent the NDIA and Bill Shorten. There's supposed to be an independent advisory council. How can you be independent when you're appointed to that position? And once you're appointed, you just go off and do your own thing and talk about yourself and about your own needs and wants and your own rights. And when you do put out information, you put your own views and opinions on facts that are put out by the NDIA to scare people. So they'll come to your side, your way of thinking. We absolutely need a national register of all support workers, especially those independent. And one of his LinkedIn posts, George said, I want to employ who I want to employ, and I'll train them myself. Well, that's good, George. So when you're sitting there and you're being helped to eat something and you're choking, how are you going to teach them when you can't talk to them? They've got no qualifications, no first aid, no CPR. So while you're choking, how are you going to coach them? Teach them what to do. Tell them what to do. We need this national register so when independent support workers do something wrong, they can be disbarred working for the NDIA or moving into my aged care as a support worker. There's got to be a way to make sure that these independent support workers have the right qualifications, insurances, first aid, CPR, police check, working with children's check. Now, I made that comment a few months ago that all support workers should have, independent support workers should have a police and children's check. And George's response, oh, what? So now I'm a child. A working with children's check is a lot more in depth than just a normal police check, George. It's not that you're a child, even though you're behaving like one, in my opinion. We have to protect everyone with a disability. And a national register also helps to protect support workers to ensure they have the right training and right qualifications to work with medications, personal care, how to dispose of soiled linen, clothes, products, food handling, food storage, cross-contamination with foods. Because someone with a serious, complex health issue gets food poisoning, God forbid, what happens? End up in hospital, could possibly die. Who knows? Now, I had a talk with interview with someone a few weeks ago about this issue. And they said, oh, what? So the person who comes to repair my barcode scanner has to be registered as an independent support worker. Well, no, because they're not a support worker. They're now coming to your house as a technician to providing the service. They're not a support worker. And then they said, so someone who delivers pre-packaged and pre-cooked foods to my house needs to have qualifications. And no, they're not a support worker. They're providing the service, but they're not a support worker. Independent businesses aren't support workers, but having a national register is a way for the government to keep track of who's getting what qualifications people have. If they do something wrong, they can be removed from working as a support worker. And another benefit is that if I'm looking for a support worker or a cleaner, I can just look up my postcode, find independent support workers who could come to my house and clean or specialise in a certain area. Then I don't have to rely on word of mouth. But to treat support workers and call them bum wipers is disgraceful, George. You should be ashamed of yourself. And there's a group growing who are opposed to the way you behave and the way you alarm and distress other people. And you will be removed. It's starting to happen now. I've spoken to different people, numerous people. They're not happy. We need support workers. We need good support workers. We don't want to make it so hard that nobody comes into into working for the NDIS or my aged care. It's got to be a simple, easy process to have a national register to make sure that someone who's working handing out medications has the proper training, knows the side effects, all that sort of stuff. There's just a whole range of things that needs to be looked at. And just saying, oh, it removes my right to choose who I want as a support worker. No, it doesn't. It ensures that whoever you choose has the correct insurances, has a police and children's check, has first aid CPR, works within the code of conduct of the NDIA, just the basic things. You still choose whoever you want. And we need to bring more people into the workforce in this area, especially in regional, rural and remote areas. Now, I did an interview with Professor John Gilroy a few weeks ago, who teaches at Sydney University about Aboriginal affairs and people with Aboriginal people with disabilities. And I encourage you to go to my YouTube channel and watch it. He's a brilliant, brilliant man, highly intelligent, very articulate, knows exactly what he's talking about, very experienced. He went out west for years, worked out west for years at Alice Springs. And people in remote areas are waiting over a year for support. Over a year. He told me of an Aboriginal man whose electric wheelchair jammed up because of the fine dust that got into the bearings. So he can no longer use it. And what's he doing? Well, he's dragging himself around on his elbows. Would we tolerate that from someone from Sydney or Melbourne? Someone living in a large metropolitan area? Because that's all everyone is ever concerned about is the large metropolitan areas. And this Aboriginal man's been waiting for a year for support to get his chair fixed. Nobody's been out to see him. They can't use a manual chair because the wheels are too narrow and they just bog down in the sand. So what's he required to do now? Is he forced to move away from his home? To move to a large metropolitan area where he can get services? No, that's his home. He has the right to stay there. They, they can't even get internet access out there. And if they did get internet access, then they could probably find something on YouTube on how to take these things apart and repair them themselves, instead of waiting over a year for someone to go out there. But George, you can't see that. All you ever see is my needs, my wants, my rights. Well, you're an absolute disgrace. If you don't step down voluntarily, there's quite a few of us gaining traction and getting you stood down. And just because you have a disability doesn't give you the right to weaponise it. I've seen your posts, I've read quite a few of your posts, and that's what you do sometimes, you weaponise your disability. You don't understand because you don't have a disability, or this is what I need, and you don't understand. Well, I'm calling you out whether you have a disability or not. I've got more than one disability, I've got quite a few. But I don't put myself before anyone else. Unlike you, George, in my opinion. Shameful behaviour and shameful actions from someone who's supposed to have a PhD in psychology. No empathy, no understanding of others. Shameful. Absolutely shameful. I just hope Bill Shorten responds to my letter that I sent. And I'll be contacting all the other organisations that you belong to too. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. I'm just absolutely disgusted with George Teleporus. I've met a few people like him before over the years whose only concern is their own disability, they're in their own little world, their own little bubble, and that's all they will ever know. And just because you have a disability doesn't mean you understand other people's disabilities. Because you don't get out there and you don't ask questions, you don't talk to people. You just make judgments on everyone else, but not yourself. Shameful, disgraceful. Well, there's not much use keep on harping on about it because I could sit here for the next 2 days going on about Dr. George Teleporus. I don't know if there's anybody in comments. No. Well, I hope you do see this, George. I really do. There's a lot of people out there who are disgusted with your behaviour. And I've had a gutful. I'm done with it. You need to be removed. There's one person on the IAC, I think, who should stay, and that's Judy Harper from the JAS, Justice Advocacy Service. She is so passionate in what she does, so knowledgeable, so articulate. She's one person on the IAC that should stay there. Everyone else should be stood down, and all those vacant positions should be filled by people who are elected by participants of the NDIS, not appointed. You can't be independent if you're in an appointed position. Let's have it. All the members of the IAC elected, not appointed. Just changing the subject now because I'm just done with George Teleporus. In the next few weeks, I'll be having a few people on with a group discussion. Somebody who used to work up high in the NDIA management, who left and discussed, and some other support workers and advocates coming on to discuss the NDIA, the NDIA board, and the IAC, and having a national register of independent support workers, of all support workers. So I'm just going to leave it there today. I've voiced my opinions. They're my opinions and they're my views on what I've seen and read on different platforms. If you don't believe me, go look for yourself. It's all there. The cartoon was taken down after a few complaints were made that George put up on Twitter, now known as X. He took it down because there was a few complaints made about it. So, but if you don't want to take my word for it, just go to LinkedIn and look up Dr. George Teleporos. And if you want to go to George Teleporos's X account, it's Dr. George Teleporos, the Crip. The Crip. I didn't think he was crippled. I thought he had cerebral palsy, but he refers himself to the rest of the world as Dr. George Teleporos, the Crip. All one word. Go and look at his post for yourself. Then come back, send me an email at blindadvocate007@gmail.com. Read his posts, then send me an email, let me know what you think. All right, we might end it there. Thanks, Chris. All right, thanks everyone. Appreciate your time. We'll just end that there for today.